Hi, welcome back to your recap videos. We've previously looked at functionalism and Marxism in a small amount of depth. Now we're going to continue looking at the third of our big three theories, feminism. So Marxism, feminism and functionalism are the three biggest theories, or the theories that you need to know in the most depth. This video will cover a brief introduction to feminism and some of the key concepts within feminist thought, looking at things like patriarchy, what that means, and how feminists talk about the construction of gender roles within the family. This will act as a brief introduction, as I say, for the subject, which we'll be going into in a lot more detail as the course continues. So, as always, some key terms. It's very important that you understand these. As with any sociological theory, feminists use a number of key terms to discuss the topics and concepts they're talking about. The first and most important one in terms of feminism is patriarchy. Now, patriarchy is the idea that society is dominated by men, or institutions dominated by men, and that men are usually the ones who get the most benefit out of its society and its institutions. However, it's important to understand that when we talk about feminism and patriarchy, feminists see patriarchy as affecting both men and women negatively. So both men and women are the victims, or can be the victims, of patriarchy. It's important that we separate our sociological conception of feminism away from the sort of social media interpretation of feminism, which you might have seen. It's important to understand that they are distinct and separate, and what a lot of people claim is feminism may not accurately represent sort of sociological perspective of feminism, which is incredibly broad and varied. So you have feminists who are Marxist feminists, you have black feminists, you have radical feminists, you have liberal feminists. There are many different versions of feminism, and it's important to understand that from a sociological perspective, it's an incredibly important theory that's had a huge amount of impact on modern sociology. Another key concept within feminism is the glass ceiling, which is a metaphor used to represent the invisible barrier that prevents women from success or excellence in certain fields. An idea that women can see the top of the mountain, as it were, but they can't access it because of systemic, societal, structural barriers that are preventing them from getting there. And then as feminism is a conflict theory, it talks about exploitation. Now, Marxists talk about conflict in terms of class conflict. Feminists would talk about it in terms of patriarchy and gender. But exploitation is simply the action or act of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from them. Okay? So Marxists see the bourgeoisie as exploiting the working class, proletariat. Feminists may see men as exploiting women through patriarchy. So in short, feminists have a very similar approach to Marxism, given that they are both conflict theories, as I mentioned before. Marxists focus on the conflict between class, whereas feminists focus more on the divisions between men and women. They believe that society is patriarchal, as they would argue that men get the greatest benefit from family life and all the other institutions of society, whilst women do not. This is despite laws granting women the same pay as men. For example, the Equal Pay Act means that it is now a crime, it's illegal in the UK, to pay a man more money than a woman for the same job, or vice versa. However, men do still tend to earn more as a result of being in better paid and higher status positions. Now, feminists would argue that this is a product of patriarchy and gender socialization and gendered norms, and we'll delve into that in future videos. However, as I mentioned before, it's really important to mention that feminists don't only focus on women. Many modern feminists also view patriarchy as negative for men. The systems that are put in place, the gendered norms and the expectations attached to gender can be positive and negative for everybody. Feminists tend to focus more on the negatives, being a conflict theory, However, some more liberal feminists may accept that there have been great strides made in progress of equality over recent years. So what is patriarchy then, really? It simply means male domination of society. And this is seen by feminists by they pointing out that men are in more positions of power and have more say in the running of society. So think of any position of authority, vast majority of those positions are filled by men. And also, we have to investigate the historical context in which we live. If you look back through history, men have historically had essentially a monopoly on power in society. So many feminists would point to the fact that men earn more money on average. Most members of government and MPs are male. Most CEOs and business leaders are male, and they would point to patriarchy as being the reason for this. Now, obviously, functionalists might disagree with this. Functionalists might say that given that society, or they believe society, is a meritocracy, the reason those men are in positions of power is because they've either worked harder or are more able. So there is an important evaluation point there. However, from a feminist perspective, it is patriarchy, the systems and the structural preferencing of men and preferencing of masculine behaviours, which are socialised into us by our families, which cause this to happen. So how does the family construct gender roles then? We spoke about this a little bit, and obviously this is a very brief introduction, so it's only going to be very, very surface level, but there are four main ways that feminists would talk about families constructing gender roles. As with anything in society, we talk about them in terms of social constructs, and feminists would argue that gender is one of these things. It's a social construct. It's not a thing that inherently exists. Gender is the way that we express ourselves, our sort of masculinity and femininity, or lack thereof. And feminists would argue that this is a social construct which has been constructed, as the nature of a social construct. So feminists would argue that parents, through manipulation, canalisation, verbal appellation and different activities, socialise their children into specific gender roles. So they socialise boys to be boys and girls to be girls. They would not argue that this is natural behaviour. So manipulation means that parents encourage their children to behave in certain ways and discourage others. This is normally done subtly. For example, it's okay for boys to play in the mud and fight, but for girls that's not seen as acceptable. So this is one of the aspects of reinforcing and constructing gender roles. There's also canalisation, which is where parents push their children to act in certain ways. This is more obvious, and there's no false pretense. This is normally done in ways such as buying certain toys or painting bedroom walls certain colours. For example, if you look at any new baby cards, you'd be hard-pressed to find one that's not pink or blue. And the pink ones are always happy baby girl, and the blue ones seem to be universally happy baby boy. There is also a conception within society that blue is a boy's colour, pink is a girl's colour, that a doll would be a girl's toy, or a soldier or a football would be a boy's toy. So this is parents actively pushing their children into canalisation, making them, do specific things. Then there's verbal appellation, which is the use of language to label children in a way that reinforces appropriate gender identification. Okay, so this can be found, for example, in nicknames that apply to children, as in, little soldier, or little man, or little princess, or whatever, anything like that. Or the words that are used to praise children. So, well done, you're so brave to a boy, or you're so strong, or you're so confident. Whereas words like pretty, or bossy, or little madam might be used for girls, which socialises them into accepting these labels, whereas boys might be praised in language might be used in different ways for boys and girls. And then, of course, there's different activities. So children are encouraged to join activities that are deemed appropriate for their gender by their parents. And the best example I can think of for this is ballet and football. You would be hard-pressed to find a ballet club that was not, if not exclusively, massively dominated by girls, and likewise you'd be hard-pressed to find a football club or a rugby club that is not dominated by boys, or at least, or if not completely male. So this is part of how feminists see gender roles as being constructed. So alongside patriarchy, gender roles are an incredibly important concept within feminism. It's important that you understand that feminists don't view gender as biological, they view it as a social construction or social construct. It's a way of expressing masculinity and femininity, and they would argue that the things that define masculinity and femininity are socially constructed and reinforced by the family. So that should be a nice, I think, very brief introduction to feminism. So far, as I said, we've looked at Marxism and functionalism and feminism. This will bring to an end our brief summary videos, and then we'll now start looking at the content that we're going to be covering, starting with crime and deviance, then moving on to families, moving on to education, and finishing with social stratification. As always, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please pop them in the comment section below, or if I am your teacher, just pop in and find me.